Jimmy Fallon was congratulating Michelle Yeoh on her historic Oscar win when something in her expression suddenly changed. The acclaimed actress, who had been glowing with pride moments before, went quiet and looked down at her hands. "Jimmy," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I almost didn't live to see this moment." The Tonight Show studio, which had been celebrating her groundbreaking achievement, fell into confused silence. Michelle's comment hung in the air like a confession that nobody was prepared to hear. Jimmy's smile faded as he realized this wasn't modesty about her success. This was something much darker and more personal. It was April 15th, and Michelle had come on the show to celebrate becoming the first Asian woman to win Best Actress at the Academy Awards. The interview had been joyful, full of laughter about her journey and the historic nature of her win. But when Jimmy mentioned how long she'd waited for this recognition, something inside her cracked. 15 years ago, I tried to kill myself," Michelle continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I would never make it in Hollywood." The words came out like they'd been trapped inside her for too long, desperate to escape. The studio fell into complete shock. Jimmy's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and deep concern. The audience seemed stunned into silence, processing this devastating revelation from someone they'd just been celebrating. "What?" Jimmy asked gently, his voice full of compassion and disbelief. "Michelle, what happened?" His tone had shifted completely from celebratory host to deeply concerned friend. "I was 45, and had been trying to break into American cinema for years," Michelle explained, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Every audition, every meeting, I was told the same thing." Her voice carried the weight of accumulated rejections and disappointments. "They said there were no roles for someone like me," she continued, her voice breaking. "Asian actresses were either martial arts experts or exotic love interests." The systematic racism she described was devastating to hear. The entertainment industry had been particularly brutal to Asian women in the early 2000s. Michelle had already achieved international success with films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Tomorrow Never Dies. But breaking into mainstream American cinema as a leading lady seemed impossible for someone who looked like her. "I remember one casting director telling me I was too Asian for American audiences, but not Asian enough for Asian audiences," Michelle recalled, the memory still painful after all these years. "I was caught in this impossible middle ground." Her voice carried the frustration of someone who had been repeatedly told she didn't belong anywhere. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus on the woman sitting across from him. When did you try?" he asked carefully, understanding this was incredibly difficult territory. "December 15th, 2008, Michelle replied. The date burned into her memory. "I remember it exactly because it was supposed to be my last day." The specificity of her recall made the moment even more chilling. "I had just been rejected for another role that went to a white actress in Yellowface," she continued, her voice taking on a clinical tone. "The director told my agent that I wasn't American enough for American audiences." The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone in the studio. The role had been for a character specifically written as Asian American, but the studio had decided to cast a white actress and use makeup to make her appear Asian. It was a practice that was unfortunately common at the time, but no less devastating for Michelle to experience. "That rejection was my breaking point," Michelle admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. It wasn't just about one role anymore. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had reached their absolute limit. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't an actress giving an interview anymore. This was a woman sharing the darkest moment of her life with the world. The cameras captured every emotion crossing her face. "I went home to my apartment in Vancouver," Michelle continued, her voice growing smaller. "I had a bottle of sleeping pills and a bottle of wine." The image she painted was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically whispering into headsets, unsure how to handle this unprecedented confession. This was live television, and they were witnessing someone reveal a suicide attempt. But the show's executive producer, recognizing the historical significance, made the call to keep rolling. Jimmy felt his own eyes welling up with tears. "What were you thinking in that moment?" he asked softly, though he seemed almost afraid to hear the answer. "That I was tired of fighting a system that would never accept me." Michelle replied without hesitation. "That maybe I was foolish to think an Asian woman could be a leading lady in Hollywood." Her words carried the exhaustion of someone who had fought an impossible battle for too long. "I had given everything to this dream," she continued, her voice breaking. 20 years of martial arts training, learning multiple languages, studying at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. The extent of her preparation and dedication made her despair even more tragic. "But none of it mattered because of how I looked," Michelle said, touching her face unconsciously. "I could outact, outfight, and outperform my white counterparts." Her voice carried bitter recognition of her own talent. "But I would never be the girl next door, never be America's sweetheart." "I took the pills," she admitted, her composure finally beginning to crack. "I wrote letters to my family, to Jackie Chan, to Jet Li." She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I was ready to give up." The letter-writing detail hit Jimmy particularly hard. "What did you say in those letters?" he asked gently, understanding that these final communications might hold the key to understanding her state of mind. "I apologized," Michelle said simply. "I apologized for not being strong enough to keep fighting." Her voice was barely audible now. "I told Jackie that I was sorry for letting down all the Asian actors who looked up to me. I told my mother that I was sorry for bringing shame to our family," she continued, tears flowing freely now. In Asian culture, mental health struggles are often seen as weakness. The cultural context added another layer of complexity to her pain. Behind the scenes, producers were grappling with how to handle this unprecedented confession. This wasn't entertainment, this was someone revealing they'd attempted suicide on live television. But they recognized the importance of letting Michelle tell her story. "What happened?" Jimmy asked gently, his voice filled with concern and hope. "You're here, you survived." His statement carried profound gratitude for her presence. "I woke up 18 hours later," Michelle said, her voice still shaky. "The pills weren't strong enough. Or maybe the universe wasn't ready to let me go." Her smile was heartbreaking as she remembered that moment of reprieve. "When I opened my eyes and realized I was still alive, I made a decision," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I decided that if I survived, I would keep fighting." The determination in her voice was inspiring and heartbreaking. "But the first thing I did was call a therapist," Michelle admitted, showing the practical steps she took toward recovery. "I realized that I couldn't fight this battle alone anymore." Her decision to seek help was crucial to her survival story. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to sit in the chair next to Michelle, abandoning the traditional interview setup. "Michelle, I'm so sorry you went through that," he said gently. "And I'm so grateful you're here. The therapy helped me understand that the problem wasn't with me," Michelle continued, looking directly at him. "The problem was with a system that had no space for people like me." Her reframing of the situation showed remarkable growth and healing. "The next day after I got out of the hospital, I got a call," Michelle continued, the timing still remarkable to her. "It was for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon." The universe's timing seemed impossibly perfect. Sometimes when you're ready to give up, life gives you exactly what you need. But even after that international success, the struggle continued. Crouching Tiger was seen as a fluke, Michelle explained. Hollywood said it was successful despite having an Asian cast. Not because of it. The industry's interpretation of her success was telling and frustrating. But even after that success, the roles were still limited, she admitted. "I was still fighting for representation, still being told I wasn't right for certain parts." Her honesty about the ongoing struggle was important for people to hear. "I spent the next decade taking whatever roles I could get," Michelle said, describing the long journey between survival and ultimate success. Some were good, some were stereotypical. Her pragmatic approach to career building was both inspiring and heartbreaking. "What kept you going?" Jimmy asked, understanding that her survival was about more than one movie role. Michelle considered the question carefully before answering. "The responsibility," she said firmly. "I realized that if I gave up, who would tell our stories?" Her voice carried the weight of representing an entire community. Who would show little Asian girls that they could be leading ladies too? "After my suicide attempt, I started receiving letters from young Asian actors," Michelle revealed, sharing a detail that hadn't been public before. "They told me I was their inspiration." The irony of being an inspiration while struggling with despair wasn't lost on her. One letter was from a 15-year-old girl, who said she wanted to be an actress because of me. Michelle continued, her voice growing stronger. She said, "I proved that Asian women could be heroes." The responsibility to that girl and others like her became a lifeline. The audience was transfixed by Michelle's vulnerability. Many were thinking of their own struggles with rejection, their own battles against systems that seemed designed to exclude them. Her story was creating space for shared understanding about perseverance and hope. "The years between Crouching Tiger and Everything Everywhere were the hardest," Michelle admitted. "I was successful enough to keep working, but not successful enough to change anything." Her description of professional limbo resonated with many in the entertainment industry. "I watched roles I was perfect for go to white actresses," she said, the bitterness still evident after all these years. "I watched Asian characters get written out of scripts entirely." The systematic exclusion she witnessed was disheartening and infuriating. "But I also watched the world slowly change," Michelle added, her voice carrying hope. "I saw crazy rich Asians break barriers." Her recognition of progress was important, even as she acknowledged how long it took. "How do you feel about winning the Oscar now?" Jimmy asked, recognizing the profound journey she'd taken to reach this moment. Michelle looked directly into the camera before answering. "Grateful," she said simply. "Not just for the award, but for being alive to receive it." Her words carried the weight of someone who understood how close she'd come to missing everything that followed. "If I had succeeded in taking my own life 15 years ago," Michelle continued, her voice growing stronger, "I would have missed everything everywhere all at once." She paused, letting that sink in. "I would have missed playing Evelyn, missed this Oscar, missed seeing representation finally happen. But most importantly," she added, her voice catching with emotion, "I would have missed being here to tell other people that it gets better." Her transformation from someone seeking to end her life to someone dedicated to saving others was profound. "What would you say to someone who might be in that dark place you were in?" Jimmy asked, understanding that Michelle's words could reach millions of people. Michelle looked directly into the camera again. "That waiting is worth it," she said with absolute conviction. "That the universe has plans for you that you can't even imagine." Her voice carried hard-won wisdom. "Your story isn't over yet." "I thought my career was over at 45, she continued. "But I won my Oscar at 60. The mathematics of hope weren't lost on anyone listening. Sometimes the best chapters of your life come when you least expect them." And to the Asian community specifically, Michelle added, her voice taking on a different tone, "Your stories matter." She looked directly into the camera. "Your faces belong on screens. Your voices deserve to be heard." Jimmy was visibly emotional as he listened. "You've inspired so many people," he said. "Not just with your performances, but with your perseverance." Michelle's smile was radiant and genuine. "The Asian community, especially Asian women, need to see that we belong," Michelle explained. "That our stories matter, that our faces can be on movie posters, that we can win Oscars." Her mission was clear and powerful. "But it's not just about representation in movies," she continued. "It's about representing hope for anyone who feels like they don't belong." Her message had expanded beyond her own community to anyone fighting for acceptance. "When I held that Oscar," Michelle said, her voice filled with wonder, I thought about that girl who almost gave up 15 years ago. She paused, clearly emotional. I wanted to tell her that all the pain, all the rejection, all the loneliness was leading to something beautiful. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't typical entertainment applause. This was recognition, gratitude, and love for someone who had shared incredible courage. Many people were openly crying, moved by her honesty and survival. "Do you still have difficult days?" Jimmy asked, understanding that mental health is an ongoing journey. Michelle nodded honestly. "Of course," she said, "but now I have tools, support, and most importantly, perspective. I have therapy, I have friends who check on me, and I have a purpose," she continued. "When I feel overwhelmed, I remember that little Asian girl who needs to see someone like her succeeding." Her support system was clearly crucial to her ongoing well-being. "The Oscar isn't just mine," Michelle said, her voice carrying the weight of history. "It belongs to every Asian actor who was told they weren't good enough." Her generosity in sharing the victory was characteristic of her journey from despair to advocacy. They talked for a few more minutes about mental health resources, about the importance of representation, and about never giving up on dreams even when they seem impossible. Michelle was more genuine and inspiring than she'd ever been in public. When the interview ended, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing off to her next commitment, Michelle stayed on stage, talking with audience members who approached her with their own stories of struggle and survival. The studio became an impromptu support group. "I never expected this response," Michelle told Jimmy, as they watched people sharing their stories around them. "I thought people might see me as weak for admitting I tried to take my own life." Jimmy shook his head. "They see someone who's incredibly strong for surviving and thriving." The episode aired exactly as it happened, with no editing to minimize Michelle's vulnerability. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with mental health organizations praising her courage and Asian advocacy groups calling it a breakthrough moment. Within hours, suicide prevention hotlines reported increased calls from people seeking help rather than expressing despair. "Your story isn't over" began trending on social media. Therapy appointments for depression and suicidal ideation increased dramatically. Michelle had accidentally started a movement of hope. Other Asian actors began sharing their own struggles with representation and mental health. Sandra Oh opened up about her depression. John Cho discussed feeling invisible in Hollywood. The walls of silence around mental health in the Asian community began crumbling. 3 months later, Michelle returned to The Tonight Show. She looked radiant, not just successful, but genuinely at peace with her journey. "How are you doing?" was Jimmy's first question, asked with genuine care. "I'm living," Michelle replied, and the simple statement carried profound meaning. Really living, not just surviving. Her smile was luminous as she spoke about embracing life fully. Michelle had used the months since her revelation to become an advocate for suicide prevention and Asian mental health awareness. Her foundation had funded culturally sensitive therapy programs and representation initiatives in entertainment. "Any regrets about sharing your story that night?" Jimmy asked. Michelle shook her head without hesitation. "None," she said firmly. "If sharing my darkest moment can save even one life, it was worth it." The Tonight Show partnered with suicide prevention organizations directly because of Michelle's appearance. They featured regular segments on mental health, cultural barriers to seeking help, and the importance of representation in media. Jimmy learned something profound that April night that changed how he approached success stories thereafter. "I realized that behind every triumph is usually a story of survival," he reflected later. "Sometimes the most important victories are simply staying alive long enough to achieve your dreams." Michelle Yeoh's suicide attempt revelation became more than a viral moment. It became a cultural shift in how the Asian community discusses mental health, breaking down generations of stigma and shame around seeking help. The ripple effects continued for years. Suicide prevention resources in Asian languages increased. Mental health became a more acceptable topic in Asian families, Countless individuals found the courage to seek help after hearing their hero's story of survival and ultimate triumph. Years later, Michelle would say that revealing her suicide attempt was as important as winning her Oscar. "That night, I realized my greatest role wasn't Evelyn or any character I've played," she reflected. "It's being Michelle Yeoh, survivor, advocate, and proof that your story can have a beautiful ending even after the darkest chapters." The lesson of that extraordinary April night was profound. Sometimes our lowest moments become the foundation for our highest achievements. Sometimes surviving is the first step toward thriving, and sometimes sharing our pain becomes our greatest gift to others walking similar paths. In a world that often celebrates only success, Michelle Yeoh reminded everyone watching that the journey to triumph includes valleys of despair, moments of giving up, and the incredible courage it takes to choose life over escape. Her Oscar became not just a personal victory, but a symbol of hope for anyone who has ever felt like giving up on their dreams or themselves.